Remakers Mark, episode 55, Watchmen. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Remakers Mark. Here we are in the 55th episode where we're discussing the graphic novel to film adaptation Watchmen. With me, as always, are my friends Andy Wicks. Andy, how are you doing tonight? And what is your least favorite comic book or graphic novel-based movie?
I am very well. Thank you for asking. And my least favorite comic book or graphic novel-based movie, it's a long descriptor. And Lee, I apologize here. But it's the Superman franchise.
What?
Ooh, interesting.
The whole thing?
Yeah, really. And mostly just because I'm just not a fan of Superman.
Oh. Even the first one?
The very first Superman movie is great, is fine. I enjoy it. But really what I enjoy about that movie is kind of the other characters. Superman to me has just never done it for me. He just seems a little too super, you know? So yeah. But I'm also, the big caveat, as I've said before, I'm not a comic book guy. And my opinion should be taken with the largest grains of salt.
Like super kosher salt.
Like super kosher sea salt.
Yes, got it. Himalayan goodness.
I would like to suggest to Andy that he check out all of the animated Justice League stuff. It really, really does Superman justice. League.
Pun intended.
I would like to suggest to Andy not to watch Superman 4, A Quest for Peace.
Or Superman 3. Well, watch Superman 3 if you just want to laugh, because it's so crazy.
Is that the Richard Pryor one?
Yes.
I think I've seen that one.
And it's legit terrible.
And I appreciate the suggestions, gentlemen, but it's just not my genre. So
bad movies happen to good superheroes. It's okay.
I've accepted it. I'm happy with where I am in life, and I'm gonna move on.
Moving right along. Footloose and fancy free. Speaking of footloose and fancy free, Jeremy Nilsson, how are you tonight? And what is your least favorite comic book / graphic novel based movie?
I'm doing quite well, and it was a hard choice to pick between two, but I'm going to go with the one that actually made me legitimately angry after watching, because I was so upset that I wasted that 90 minutes, and that is Catwoman from 2004.
Oh, I never saw that, and I don't feel too bad about it.
No,
I'm okay with that.
Feel great about that.
Okay, I will.
It's one of the few movies that at the end of it, I really was just upset that I had just done that.
Is that Halle Berry?
Yeah. Yep. Awful.
I did hear it was quite bad,
awful.
So hence my avoiding it. Cool. I dig that. Lee Harlan Ellis, how are you tonight? And what about you? What is your least favorite of that adaptation type thingy?
I'm doing okay. And I got to say the 2003 Ang Lee Hulk movie.
Ooh.
Yep.
That
Okay.
was top to bottom awful. Just
That movie I thought was interesting, at least. I didn't love it, but I at least thought that they did some pretty interesting things as far as like making it legit comic booky. Like I liked the kind of multi-panel part to it.
See, I
And
hated
plus
that.
I'll see anything that Jennifer Connelly is in, so yeah.
Who was the Hulk in that one?
Eric Bana.
Yeah.
That was the first one in the quote unquote MCU.
Yeah.
How many Hulks
Correct.
have there been in the MCU?
3.
Three.
Yep. Terrible movie.
Well, all right. Excellent. Mark Joesting, how are you tonight? And what is your least favorite comic book / graphic novel based movie?
I'm fine, thank you. And for this, I'm going to go with the Fantastic Four movie, The Rise of Silver Surfer.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
That's in the bottom 5 too.
Yeah, it takes two amazing characters, in addition to the Silver Surfer, the other being Galactus, and makes them super, super boring. Everybody in this movie deserved a lot better.
And what made me most sad about that movie, besides that it was terrible, was how great they did Silver Surfer from a visual perspective.
Yeah, he looked great.
And then just totally, it was a turd. It was just bad.
Bad it was.
I haven't seen that one either, so I guess I'm 2 for 2 on bad
that's,
comic book
That's
movies.
fine.
Okay. I'll stick with that. I was just watching the day before tomorrow, whatever the crappy Roland Emmerich disaster movie was. I was just watching that before
watching today?
Yeah. While listening to Today by the Smashing Pumpkins. No, I was just watching that before. So it's not like I have great taste in bad action movies. Maybe I do. I don't know. I don't know how that works out. But yeah, I'm not against bad film, but I'm okay that I missed those. My name is Kyle Delahunt. I will be your host again this lovely evening. Although the world is falling apart, and that's okay. We're doing our darndest here. And I'm going to give two here because I can. The first one I don't actually dislike, but I think it probably is a pretty bad movie, and that is Howard the Duck from 1986, I think it is. I'm not quite a Howard the Duck apologist because it is a really, really strange movie. There's just some things in there that are just wrong in all the ways. However, I still kind of like it, and I remember really liking it as a kid, so I think that's what ties into it. It's not a good movie, I'll give it that. But the legit dislike one is the first Judge Dredd movie that was made with Sylvester Stallone. Just so bad, so bad. Yeah. Everything wrong about Stallone and action movies, all packed together. And I kind of like Stallone. I'm cool with Stallone. It was just really bad.
Yeah, thank God for the second Dredd movie.
Yes. I was going to say that how could you have a good Sylvester Stallone and Rob Schneider movie, but then Demolition Man exists. So I don't know. I guess it was just Judge Dredd was just bad.
I would be careful using the word good around Demolition Man.
That movie is great.
That movie is not great.
You shut your cherry pie hole. It's a great movie. It was prescient with regards to social distancing. Moving right along, let's talk about
seashells, Kyle. Seashells.
See, I know. That's what I'm saying. We wouldn't have to worry about going to Costco for 4,000 pieces of toilet paper if it weren't for seashells. Interesting. Up next, of course, is our Remakers Mark recommend segment. And since this was my movie, I'm going to recommend something. Once again, it is a podcast. Surprise, surprise. I know. This podcast is called Dust. It is the first season of it, which was maybe 20 episodes, something like that. Not super long, but it was basically very well staged readings of science fiction stories. Anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes, just really well done readings of H.P. Lovecraft, of Ray Bradbury, all kinds of different stuff, kind of in the sci-fi realm. The second season, however, is the one that I recommend, and the series is called Flight 008. And the premise is that there was a plane flying from Tokyo to San Francisco in the year 2020. They hit very standard turbulence, and in doing that, somehow get fast forwarded to the exact same day 20 years later. And every podcast episode is about a particular person on the flight. So, for example, episode, let's see here. I guess they don't have them numbered, but like seat 39J, seat 13F, seat 42A. So it goes into sort of from whence they came and the world that they're going to. And it's a really interesting mix of futurism and emotionality and kind of humanism, because it's, what if you were old, might your parents be dead? Or if you are young, what would your parents be like? Did you, had you just broken up with someone that now you're going to rekindle a romance with? Like all these different things that 20 years, that you didn't move at all as far as age goes, but everybody else did. Just really, really interesting. And I highly recommend it. The performance value and the production value is extraordinary. I can't recommend it enough. So a podcast called Dust and the season called Flight 008. Super good. Check it out.
Word.
All right. Up next, before we talk about Watchmen, Lee, what is our next movie? You are alphabetically chosen here. So what are we going to do here?
Well, I thought we would go back to like an 80s comedy. And I kind of was thinking, I had a few different things in mind, but I finally settled on the Steve Martin, Lily Tomlin movie, All of Me.
Yes!
Nice.
Oh, that's such a good movie.
It's a fantastic movie.
Oh, man.
And I remember really enjoying it as a kid, and I would honestly say that it's one of Steve Martin's best performances.
It is amazing.
Yes.
Oh, this will be fun.
I don't think I have seen it.
Yeah, did this just get brought up recently in the last, I don't know, few weeks?
We've talked about this.
Somebody mentioned it, yeah.
Yeah, and I haven't seen it either, so that's great.
It's a really good comedy.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it is. I agree, Lee. It's probably one of Steve Martin's best performances, simply from the physical control and discipline that he has to use here. It's into comedic effect is great,
and it's absolutely believable too. So yeah, I think that'll be a good one for us.
Cool. All of me. Good choice, Lee. I'm excited for that. I'm down for an 80s comedy, and I'm certainly down for a Steve Martin, Lily Tomlin 80s comedy.
Yes.
That's great. Sweet. All right, so let's quick revisit the characters that we spoke about in part one, and specifically those that were the big winners here. So we had 6 major characters in part one. The first was the comedian, originally played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan. The big winner was Lee's choice of Michael Madsen. That was an inspired choice, Lee. Well done.
Yay.
Excellent. Very well done. The second choice, or pardon me, the second role was that of Dr. Manhattan, originally played by Billy Crudup. We went with my choice of Jeffrey Wright, which I thought was, was pretty good. I'm down for that. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll take it. Thank you very much. The third role was the role of Laurie Jupiter, or Silk Spectre II, originally played by Malin Ackerman, or Molin Pokemon. We went with Jer's choice of Mary. I can't even talk. With Jer's choice of Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Very good. Well done. Well done. The fourth role, the role of Dan Dryberg, or Night Owl, originally played by Patrick Wilson. We went with Andy's choice of Ed Norton. I like that. Don't worry, we only got 14 more to go, gang. The fifth role, that of Adrian Veidt, or Ozymandias, originally played by Matthew Good. We went with my choice of Dan Stevens. Yay, good job, me. Thank you very much. And last but not least, the role of Rorschach, originally played perfectly by Jackie Earle Haley. We went with Mark's choice of John Bernthal. So punishing choice, Mark. Well done. Just a punishing choice. Very good. Well done.
Hey, we all won one.
Did
That's
we?
true.
Yeah.
Wow. That's what happens when there's 14 options from which to pick.
My odds have increased.
Good job. And then finally, before we move on to our continued discussion of Watchmen, we threw out to social media to see what people might think about how we could recast the film. I'll go first. I threw it out on Facebook. Allison Moffat, who has been a frequent contributor here, said, I adore the book and really disliked the movie when it first came out. I rewatched it prior to watching the HBO series, which was stunning, agreed, and I warmed to it a little more the second time through. While I think it is pretty well cast overall, Jackie Earle Haley and Jeffrey Dean Morgan are exceptionally suited to their roles, and I think we would all agree with that. I will vote for anyone but Malin Pokemon as Laurie Jupiter. That was in all caps, and she didn't actually write Pokemon. I just like saying that. So, all right. I like it. That's a tough one. I think that's right in line. I mean, if we could have not recast Jackie Earle Haley and Jeffrey Dean Morgan of all of those, I think that's probably what we would have done. Marcos Lopez Carlson just said, could we just recast the director and call it done? Marcos, we're going to have a talk about that in just a few minutes here, so don't you worry. Don't you worry. And then finally, Jordan Limmer said, easy one, Gilbert Gottfried as Dr. Manhattan. And now I'm so intrigued by that. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Andy, sounds like you had a little bit of feedback as well.
Yeah, I had 2. Matt Barsness, high school classmate. Hey, Matt. Suggested Thomas Jane as Rorschach. Thought that was interesting.
Another Punisher.
And then my sister just said, I don't understand your nerd words. I'm not really sure why she took the time to write that to me, but she did. So there we are.
Okay. Thank you, Anne.
Yes.
Okay. Trying to make sure I got the right sister. Very good. Good. Okay, so now, having talked through part one, our recommendations, our feedback, we are ready to talk about the plot, tech, and filmmaking appreciations, changes, thoughts that we have about this movie. This is definitely an opinionated movie that has opinionated opinions. That went well. There's a lot to say about this, and I really think that this all starts with the choice that they made for director, which Marcos, our feedback provider, referred to there, that of being Zack Snyder. Jer, you kind of started that discussion on our pre-production. Why don't you start that off and let's get into this.
Well, like or hate Zack Snyder, he definitely Snydered this movie.
He Snydered all over this movie.
And
Gesundheit.
if I am remembering my recent history correctly, he was signed on to do this shortly after finishing 300, which was another graphic novel based movie. And I believe that his job on 300 was pitch perfect. He knew what the source material was. He knew what he wanted to convey through it, and he basically pulled panels onto the screen. And 300 is, for what it is, a great movie, I think. The problems then came in when they said, "Oh, he's good at graphic novel movies. He gets that feel, that vibe," and so they signed him on for this. And you can tell that he cares about this source material as well, but you can also tell he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand what Alan Moore was trying to say with this, and so I think that he was trying to turn this into a similarly feeling movie from 300, where it's panel for panel, and there are some beautiful shots of this movie that look like pages of graphic novels, and it's great. But he turned all the heroes or all the characters in this movie into heroes, which I think was kind of against the point that Alan Moore was trying to make, and turned them into kind of badasses. And it really sort of sapped a lot of the life and a lot of the point that Alan Moore was trying to make with Watchmen. And so I don't know if you call Zack Snyder a one-trick pony because of that, and then his subsequent work, or if it's just him doing what he does and doing it very well, but just missing the mark with what this movie was, what the ideas behind this movie were.
I would wager he's maybe not a one-trick pony. He has shown a very distinct style. The first director that popped into my head in comparison was Terry Gilliam, in terms of like a style of movie. Not saying that they are equals. I prefer Terry Gilliam.
And he was actually tagged to direct Watchmen prior to Zack Snyder.
I would have loved that movie, I think.
I would equate it to Michael Bay, if you will, in terms of just the tone.
That's a good one too. Yeah. That he has a very, very much a style. I totally agree with you, Jared. I think he missed the point that his Snydering all over the movie gave it this. It's like he gave it a gloss that the story didn't need or originally have. He tried so hard to, I think, mimic a lot of the visuals, and he did a great job with that. I think if anyone who's familiar with the graphic novel on which this film is based would obviously recognize set pieces and character design and things like that. He was very true to the original and a lot of that. But the book is very, there's a desperation and a dirtiness and like a pallor that just kind of hangs over everything that I didn't get in the movie because it felt too polished and shiny in a way. And I think part of that might have been, maybe we could call it the George Lucas effect from the prequels, where he just tried so hard to make everything CGI that it just ruined everything. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I could be off base on this one, but that's kind of the impression that I got.
I think that's part of it, but I think that it goes back to him just misunderstanding what this is about. And the fact that we feel bad when Rorschach dies at the end, the fact that any of these characters seem to be heroic really isn't what it's about. I mean, all of these characters are motivated by things other than doing the right thing. They're all pretty awful. And some of that comes through, especially with the comedian, which I thought was done both by Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Zack Snyder. I thought that character was really well done. But beyond that, you really had he was really turning this into the modern superhero movie, and that's sort of the opposite of what it should have been.
I agree.
If I may rebut.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'd like to play devil's advocate and offer a counterpoint that Snyder actually didn't stray too far from the book, especially in regards to the fighting and how good the Watchmen are at it.
Yeah, I will defend that as well. I actually think is pretty cool, and I think is fine. So
yeah, it is cool. But the thing that I wanted to focus on was that he only added one fight scene. Then it's really not very. The rest of them aren't very exaggerated. the fact that you translate them into a motion picture format is going to do this, this effect, whether it's Zack Snyder or a different director. But I mean, we have in the book, we do have Rorschach taking down 10 police officers, SWAT team at that. We do have a Night Owl 2 who engineers a VTOL aircraft in his basement, apparently. We have a lot of guys that are actually pretty special people. And I would agree about their motivations, that they're not necessarily heroes in that regard. But I think that he stayed pretty true to the book on a lot of that. And the super high gloss that we get is largely just a side effect of it being a movie.
Yeah, I think that's just a struggle in adapting. I mean, it's one of those things where people always said that there's no way that this could be made into a movie. And I have a feeling that is what they foresaw. The challenge in taking something that is paneled into something that is moving is always hard, but especially with this story, because the subtext is written more implicitly in the comic book or in the graphic novel, and it is more explicitly on film because it has to. You can't just kind of let things ride quite the same. And I don't fully blame Zack Snyder for that, but I do think that he could have gone different ways with it and had it be just as effective. I think that the ultimate litmus test is, if this movie were fully detached, if the graphic novel didn't exist, what would you think of this movie? You know what I mean? And I think it's an enjoyable movie. I think it is, now that I'm kind of Snydered out, I feel less strongly about it, but I do think that I remember when I saw it originally and I really enjoyed it. And I do think it is a very effective movie. It just so happens to have the baggage, quote unquote, if you will, of one of the most well-known graphic novels of all time, weighing it down in a perfectly understandable way. That is not me speaking ill of the graphic novel at all. But if it kind of feels like, from a Sheen filmmaking perspective, if that got brought back 10% even, it doesn't have to be a dramatic reinterpretation of it. If it just becomes a little bit more straightforward, I think you would have the opportunity for more character work. You'd have the opportunity for things to just sit a little bit more, I don't know, evenly, I guess, than it does in this. And then especially just the way that it turns the characters into more clear good guys, I guess. I don't know, Jerry, can you speak to that just a little bit more? Like your concerns of taking people that are largely despicable, especially Rorschach, and turning them into kind of either heroes or anti-heroes?
Well, one of the things that I loved about, and I'm going to jump the gun a little bit here, one of the things I loved about the new series is the very well done and sort of obvious evolution of where Rorschach would have gone, and becoming sort of this torch bearer for white nationalists in the future, or in our present now. Because you look at the lines that he was saying and sort of his worldview back in the 80s, and that's really what he was. And you had somebody like the comedian who was basically a nihilist and anarchist. Like, he thought that there was no point to doing anything good or bad. You just did stuff. There really wasn't anybody with any sort of altruistic motives. Maybe with the exception of Dan Dreiberg, but he was portrayed in the graphic novel as sort of, and we talked about this in episode 1, just kind of schlubby. And yes, he had the brain to do it, but he didn't have the confidence to do it, and he was sort of neutered by his own psyche and being able to accomplish much. And so it's not that they were all necessarily evil, but none of them were really our prototypical heroes that we see in superhero movies now. And yes, all of our sort of in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and everything else, you have these sort of flawed heroes that have to overcome things and sort of find their heroism. But I don't think that was necessarily going to happen in Watchmen, nor should it have happened.
That's helpful. Thank you. I appreciate your filling in those gaps. Does anybody want to touch on that at all or add to that at all?
I agree with Jer and his descriptions of the characters. I think the comedian was, like you said, a kind of a nihilist. I think the comedian and Rorschach were done, in my opinion, were the most interesting characters in the story. But in kind of thinking back on it, while Jeffrey Dean Morgan did a fantastic job with the comedian itself was an easy note to play. It's essentially just someone just doesn't care about anybody else and does his own thing because it's fun. Like he gets a kick out of shooting smoke grenades at innocent bystanders who are trying to, protest something like that. Like he's
hippies. Call them hippies.
He calls them hippies. And that Rorschach, like you said, essentially was kind of leading into the alt-right white nationalist movement with his opinions on the world. The other characters, Dryberg, I wanted to know why he suddenly was so afraid of the world, because it seemed that way. He seemed so very happy to just kind of visit Night Owl 1, and then he seemed independently wealthy. They made like a little comment about that, how he just he's got the money, he owns the building he lives in, he owns the next building so that he can fly Archie out there, and this and that and the other. But what made him go from being this superhero to being almost afraid of it? And we get a little taste of it in what I think in a flashback of the last interaction between him and the comedian, when the comedian is again shooting smoke grenades at the hippies. And he seems kind of despondent about what has happened, but it seems to progress beyond that. And I want to know maybe a little more about that. The other characters, though, just never really interested me. I don't know why. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel like
just gonna tail off there, I guess.
That's fine. We accept that. To me, it felt like leaving that comedian skirmish moment, I feel like he was probably thankful that the Keene Act was passed. Like, okay, I don't have to do this anymore. But as years pass on, it's literally like the only thing that can get him off, and it comes off literally and figuratively in this film, that he misses that so much and he needs that so much, but he doesn't want to admit it. And it's just this kind of like bubbling up feeling inside him. Now, none of this comes through in the performance or the characterization itself. I just am making this up for him. So I don't think that that's necessarily anything that was like this rich character development in the movie. That's just like what I'm guessing. That's where it could have gone, I think.
It's like he suddenly didn't need to be the character anymore. He could just now work for the government and just go do these kind of covert ops behind the scenes and do what he always did, but not have to worry about like the morals behind it.
Yeah.
He's just like following orders now. The government told me to take down this regime. All right, cool. I'm going to go do it.
Wait, are you talking about the comedian or Dan Dryberg?
I thought you were talking about the comedian.
I also missed that transition.
I thought Kyle was talking about Dan Dryberg.
Who were you talking about, Kyle?
I was. That's okay.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah,
that's on me.
So take all of that stuff that you just said about working for the government and covert ops and instead replace it with having the most awkward sex scene in a flying owl.
Awkwardly soundtracked, I would say.
Oh my gosh, that was
rough.
uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah.
Even more so rewatching 10 years later.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, now that we've kind of talked about what we don't love about it, let's talk a bit about what we did like about it. Let's turn the tide. I will start literally with the start of the movie, which is, I think, the credit sequence is probably the best part of the movie. They do an amazing job of world building in the first, 5 minutes after the comedian getting murdered, and then the credit sequence itself is pretty extraordinary. But man, that's the best of Zack Snyder as far as I'm concerned. You know what I mean? Like just that style, just absolutely incredible, showing,
he's a montager. That's what he is.
He is. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. He is a sequencer. Yes. Like the young woman putting the flower into the rifle, and then you see the whole line of rifles going off and killing them instead of it being peace, and seeing Nixon reelected, seeing Dr. Manhattan. I mean, like all soundtrack to what's the Dylan song?
Bob Dylan, Times Are Changing.
Times Are Changing. Thank you. Oh, just incredible.
It's like, and it takes in the book, that whole sequence like it's a significant chunk, not a significant chunk, but it's, it's several pages of backstory and exposition that he really succinctly wraps up in a very interesting way.
Yep.
To just essentially set the stage and get the ball rolling right off the bat. And I agree with you, Kyle. I remember watching the first time being intrigued by that, and the second time being even more intrigued because I knew the story better when I rewatched it for this episode, and thinking like, wow, that really did summarize nicely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the most beautiful exposition dump that you could possibly have had. Like,
yes, it did so very effectively.
Yeah,
all right, who's
quite
next? Who else has something that they liked? Mark, how about you?
Yeah, I think that credit sequence is a really good example of something that I noticed a lot in Zack Snyder stuff, is that he can place a slow-mo sequence better than anybody I've ever seen.
He has in every movie he has a 1 out of 144 chance of doing it though. So but yes, I agree. That's me joshing, if you will.
Yeah, it still is effective.
Yes.
The fight scene in with Night Owl and Silk Spectre breaking Rorschach out had it where they kind of did a side scrolling slow mo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just reminded me of basically the same exact scene from 300 when random Spartan warrior number 4
Sure.
did the same thing, like broke through 10 different waves of dudes to get to something or another. I don't even remember, but it was that same, all of a sudden the perspective switched to that side scrolling slow-mo, and it was just so elegant and so pretty and so visceral, and they were both outstandingly choreographed and shot.
Agreed.
Yep, totally agree.
Who's next? What else we got?
You're next.
Oh, look at that. We touched on it just a little bit. But I actually am in favor of how like super strong they made the characters. I think, the graphic novel never explains it. It just sort of hand waves who they are and how they got them, with the exception of Dr. Manhattan. Did I just say Manhattan? It's a totally different character. With the exception of Dr. Manhattan, who is literally a superhero. Every one of them is just a human who is smart / talented / rich / whatever. But I actually kind of like that they gave them a little bit more than that. I think it made it more interesting. I think it was in line with the comic overall. It wasn't quite that explicit, but like the battle that I'm thinking of is when Ozymandias is meeting with the energy bigwigs like Lee Iacocca. And he gets shot at, and he, gets out of the way of the bullet, and then just goes to bat with the guy with like a stanchion, a solid gold stanchion, and just whacks him. It's so great.
They borrow heavily from the Matrix in that scene.
Yes, for sure. And him catching a bullet later, it all worked for me, and I can completely understand why it wouldn't work. But for me, I liked that. I was for that.
Going back to what you said earlier, Kyle, if you take this outside of its source material and present it just as it is, then I think it's fine, and I would have maybe even wanted a little bit more of it.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, the fight scenes, going back to what Mark said, the fight scenes and the choreography are great. I mean, everything is just so wonderfully shot and very, very visceral in that Zack Snyder-y comic booky way. So I would have taken more of that if we're going to focus on that type of superhero, air quotes.
Yeah. Cool. Mark, what else you got?
Songs. I like songs.
Interesting.
There were songs in this movie.
Sure.
Did you like the songs?
I like the songs. What I'm getting at is there's a soundtrack, of course, and they did a really interesting job of choosing the songs to feature that were, of course, period accurate, like the Dylan song and like Hallelujah in the aforementioned totally awkward sex scene. And where they did feature those songs, like they really featured them.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting to me. And yeah, it made that scene so awkward. Which I thought was great.
I feel like we should start a YouTube channel, kind of like the Walk of Life project, but it'll be the the Archimedes project where we soundtrack the sex scene with different songs, like throw some Weird Al in there, like I don't know,
yakety sax.
Yakety sax. I don't know. I don't think the YouTube would show it because it's pretty filthy. But boy, I think that's got to happen at some point.
Oh man,
because yes,
that's a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
I think I mostly. Mark, were you finished with your point? Did you still have more?
I kind of just trailed off, so yeah, let's end it there.
I just want to say that when the soundtrack worked, like Bob Dylan, it really, really worked. But when it didn't work, it was really obvious when it didn't work.
Yeah.
And I like the period style of most movies set in the past. They kind of tend to do that, and I like when they do that, and oftentimes it works really well. And in this one, it was very hit or miss. And I wish that they would have hit more, because I think that would have lent itself even better to making this thing feel more cohesive.
Yeah. I think the soundtrack was wonderful. The 99 Luftballons made me super happy, just because it always does. That song is just so good. I wish it had a different score, because the score was this weird, like, Richard Thompson, twinkly, kind of sexy, but kind of bluesy, but neither of each really guitar. It was really weird. I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I thought in a remake, it would be great to have a Atticus Ross, Trent Reznor score for this, which is fitting because they did that for the HBO show. So I'm sure they'd be down. But just something that is more cohesive, that is just, I don't know, just more interesting. That would be the thing that I would change. Speaking of changing things, how could we do this differently? So we had some thoughts about what would we change in the movie from a filmmaking perspective or a setting perspective. Jared, you want to start us off with that?
Yes, I do. So obviously the graphic novel was that came out in the mid to late 80s, and it was about the 80s, an alternate history version of the 80s, but had a lot of 80s themes to it. The Cold War, nuclear weapons and nuclear power, themes that were very prevalent in movies and in people's minds back then. Not so much now. And so setting it as it was in the graphic novel, if we did a remake now, I think it would be a challenge to find some ways to rewrite it with some more applicable and relatable themes to a 2020 audience. And I think that's one of the reasons why the HBO show did so well, is that they did that. They took the universe of the Watchmen, but they put it in a place and created a theme around it that is that we're all talking about now, that we're all still having conversations about, having to figure out how to understand and cope with. And so I think that either we need to do something like the HBO show did and set it somewhere else or sometime else, or we need to figure out a way to make the 80s more relevant to now. And maybe that's energy or, I don't even know. Environmental, something like that. But I don't think Cold War paranoia is really a theme that grabs in comic book movies much anymore.
It's more for our generation than the younger generation.
Mm-hmm. Jerry, you had some notes here about kind of the degree to which they remade the whole graphic novel or did not do that. Do you want to touch on that a little bit? Yeah.
So one of the things that I wanted to see in the movie after rereading the graphic novel is this sort of story within the story of the pirate. Now I forgot the name of it, but the pirate,
the
comic
Black
book
Freighter,
Tales of the Black Freighter.
There we go.
Tales of the Black Freighter. In the graphic novel, it's sort of it's a story that's being read as a comic book and kind of mirrors the story of the graphic novel itself. And I missed that in the movie itself. And as I was thinking about it this week, I go back to the movie Kill Bill, and I can't remember which of the two Kill Bills it was in. Lee, help me out. It's the story of Lucy Liu's character.
That's volume 1. Yeah.
Volume 1.
Yep.
And that, like, her backstory is all of a sudden told as sort of this anime style cartoon.
Oh, yeah.
And I would love to see something like that in the movie, and maybe not necessarily a big single chunk of it, but interspersed throughout it, maybe, or have a big chunk of it, and then have certain moments where it is a very clear mirror, like have almost a split screen sort of like back and forth kind of thing. But I go back to that Lucy Liu Kill Bill storytelling device, and I just loved how they did that. I would love to see something like that with the Black Freighter in a remake.
It's funny, Jared, that you mentioned that, because you can see that.
A what?
Yeah, turns out that there's a supercut of this movie that does exactly that. That has anime interstitials of the Tales of the Black Freighter interspersed throughout the movie. And yeah, it is super, super cool.
Wow. I didn't know it was anime. I thought it was live action. My bad.
Voiced by Gerard Butler.
Cool. Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
I didn't realize it was animated either, but now I really want to try to figure out how to find that.
Yeah. I don't think this movie needed to be any longer. So I'm hesitant to put a lot of weight behind that, but it intrigues the hell out of me. I will say that.
Well, I'm going to hand off to you by giving a really great lead in by saying, I think this probably as a remake should have been a series.
Oh, snap. It is sort of. So there is an HBO show just called Watchmen. It is set in Tulsa, Oklahoma in the modern future-ish. It's pretty much now, but it's a different now than now, because it is basically picking up from where the Watchmen universe left us. And if you manage that, or imagine that fast forwarded 30, 35 years.
Robert Redford is president.
Yep, Redford is president, which they referred to in the movie, the comic book. So yeah, it's very interesting. And the show,
when does it take place?
Like now, basically.
2019.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said 30 years from now. I'm like, he would be like 110 years old.
It's the Futurama, like it's just his head in a jar.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. It's essentially a show about race relations that's basically disguised as a vigilante justice movie. And it is, series. And it is amazing. It is, man, I mean, it might be the single best like season of a thing I've seen. It is just so incredibly well done. The casting was perfect. The filming was perfect. The effects were perfect. The story is top notch. I can't recommend it enough. It is so good. Specifically, the 6th episode of it, where they dive into the origin of hooded justice, is probably the best episode of TV I've ever seen. It is unreal and so affecting. I cannot highly recommend it enough. Did you get that far yet, Jer?
That is the next episode I'm going to watch.
Oh, you are in for a treat, my friend.
Wait.
It is so cool. So cool. Yeah, so I would highly recommend it. If you have HBO, watch it. If you don't have HBO, do that free trial thingy and just plug through that in about, I don't know, 10 hours, 8 hours, however long it is. It's totally worth it. Before we wrap up here, I do want to do two things. One, I want to just touch on performances to see if there's anything that we want to touch on here that we didn't talk about in part one. And then I want to do our rating here. So let's start with performances. Anything that you guys wanted to talk about that we didn't really talk about in part one?
Nothing that I think would just be considered mean and ranty.
Well, and I think that we already have really kind of largely come to the consensus that Jackie Earle Haley and Jeffrey Dean Morgan were great. Everybody else was sort of running the gamut of fine to okay to pretty good to good.
Meh. If you had three names, you did awesome. If you had two names,
I think I'm the outlier here, where I actually really enjoyed pretty much the entire cast.
That's good.
I didn't dislike anybody. Probably the closest to dislike was Billy Crudup, and I think that was more less about his performance and more about the directing than anything.
Dr. Manhattan is such a hard character to work out.
Yeah, exactly.
And not to sound like a broken record here, but the HBO show just like nails it. And it has its troubles too, but just totally nails that character. Super duper good. But yeah, it's, if you can't make the most powerful, superhero ever who was human and got destroyed and then managed to find his way back to life-ish, if you can't make that interesting, like, that's pretty tough. And that's essentially what they did. It's just like, it's kind of like how the thing that I like least about Star Wars now is Jedi, because like for so long, They just made it like the most boring, dumb, like majority whips or something. I don't know. Like it's just so boring, and they're just so stuffy. They needed to be interesting. And I think the sequel trilogy did a very good job of that. So I'm very glad for that. But man, like the prequel Jedi suck. So dumb, so boring. And that's what Dr. Manhattan was. He was a prequel Jedi.
And we have our episode title.
Yeah, I think so. All right, so let's move on to our rating of the movie. We'll go backwards here. So Wix gets a chance to get Wixed, although that won't happen here. Lucky. Mark, what is your rating of the film on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being the worst thing you've ever seen, 10 being holy crap, amazing, and the scale of your choice.
Well, I rather like this movie, and I think I'm going to give it 8.5 out of 10 blue penises.
Oh, nice. I was going to do blue wangs. That's a good one.
I don't want to see half a blue penis.
You can see a whole one several times.
You could see 8 of them.
I would rather see 8 whole ones than 1/2 of one.
Wow. There's some math there that I just don't understand, but that's okay. Lee, you've been very quiet. I'm very intrigued to hear your thoughts on this. Please feel free to expound to whatever degree of detail you wish.
I will probably give it 6.5 out of 10 have a nice day buttons.
All right. Nice.
Nice.
What, so just because you've been so quiet, I'm going to pick on you just a tiny little bit. What were your thoughts of the movie? I don't believe you had seen it previously, correct?
I hadn't.
Okay.
It was okay. I mean, it was entertaining. I'm not quite as invested in the franchise, I think, as others are, but I thought it was okay.
Okay. Cool. I will go next. I'm going to give it, this is really hard. I'll give it 7.5 Pagliaccis.
Ooh.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I am Pagliacci.
Yeah, so good. Good line. Good joke, in fact. Jeremy, on to you. What is your rating?
I'm going to give it 7.5. This is going to be a confusing rating. I'm going to give it 7.5 out of 10, 4 minutes to midnight.
Nice.
All right.
Nice. Doomsday clocks.
So 20, let's see, that's
30.
Yep.
7.5, so 30 some minutes to midnight.
Exactly.
30 odd feet of grunt.
30 odd feet of ground, 30 seconds to Mars.
It all makes sense now.
If Russell Crowe and Jared Leto formed a band, 30 odd minutes to grunting Mars.
Yeah, that's pretty much the Dr. Manhattan character arc. So nailed it.
That's true.
First try. First take.
Wow. The connections are just everywhere.
It's true. So speaking of connections, Andy, what is your rating?
I'm going to give this 5 out of 10 cooking grease baths.
Oh, that's so brutal.
Yikes.
Oof, yikes. That's a scene that the movie makes even more hurtful than the graphic novel, which is saying something, because it was pretty brutal there too.
Rorschach in the jail was by far my favorite part of the movie.
Yep. Agreed.
Well,
Nice.
our ratings were all over the place on this one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the movie.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's an opinionated film in every way. Speaking of opinionated, Remakers Mark is a proud member of the Math is Hard Network. To find out more information about this podcast or any other podcast on the network, check us out at mathishard.net. There you will find show notes with links to all of the people, movies, and links discussed in this episode. This information is also attached to the show file in the podcast client of your choice. You can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts, including Google Play and iTunes, and now Spotify, where you can rate and review Remakers Mark, which would mean the world to us. We are on Facebook, search for Math is Hardnet or Remakers Mark, Twitter @Remakers Mark, and Instagram @Remakers Mark Podcasts. So please join in the discussion there as well. Well, I think that was a fun experiment. We talked about a movie that I think has a lot of hate around it. I think that we took a couple sips of haterade, but I don't think that we drowned ourselves in it. I think we did a good job of balancing it and a good discussion of it. So good work, everybody. We don't need to have a jug of haterade poured over us unless you want to. In that case, cool. So thanks for that. Until the next time, where it'll be a very, very different movie, which I'm excited for. Until that time, gentlemen, may the Force be with you.
And also with you.